Welcome to Balkans Debrief. I'm Ilva Tare, a Nonresident Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. Today, we'll talk about one of the EU's most ambitious initiatives for the Western Balkans, the EU Growth Plan. And this isn't just about economic numbers. It's about transformation, integration, and the European future of the entire region. If executed well, this plan could double the region's GDP, currently at $160 billion, and pave the way for deeper EU ties. But like with every big promise, there are some big questions to be answered. And to do that, I'm joined by three of the experts who co-authored a new Atlantic Council's report on the growth plan. Valbona Zeneli, economist and non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center, Richard Grieveson, deputy director at the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, and Isabelle Ioannides, Europe's future fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences and ERSTE Foundation in Vienna. So this initiative has the potential to be a game changer, but only if it's implemented strategically. How can we ensure that this plan truly reshapes the Western Balkans and strengthen its ties to the EU single market? Val, I'll start first with you.
Well, thank you, Ilva. I think on the Western Balkans, this has been the soundbite over the last year, the growth plan. Everybody talks about it. I don't know if the growth plan will be a game changer. For sure, it is a novelty and is helping to revitalize the enlargement process with the Western Balkans. As a result of the geopolitical necessity also for the European Union to enlarge both, in the Western Balkans, but also in its east. I believe that it's a very important, maybe the money is not enough. And of course, it's 6 billion to its grants, and the 4 will be loans. And it's not enough. It could be a good carrot incentive in order to push for those reforms that are related to the economic rule of law, as I like to call it, rule of law reforms that will help with economic development of those countries in order to crowd in more real private investment from the Western countries, from the European Union. Frankly speaking, of course, the European Union is the main trade partner, is the main investor in the Western Balkans, but that's not enough to increase that economic convergence with Western European countries. And then also, Ilva, another very important point regarding the growth plan has to do with, how it's shaped. It resembles the EU's recovery and resilience facility after COVID, meaning that it sets very specific milestones and benchmarks. And after those have been achieved, then the money will be dispersed. So that's a very important tool in order to connect the real reforms with the disbursement of money.
Thank you, Val. I wanted to ask Isabelle, do you believe it's going to be a game changer? What's the potential or a turning point for the region? And then we will talk indeed that if the region can handle the pressure that will come from this growth plan when it comes to reforms and tangible results.
It could be a game changer. Of course, it depends how the two parties handle it. So I think that this plan has to be seen within the framework of EU enlargement, but it's only a very, very small part of it. Now, it has a lot to do with rebuilding lost trust as well, and building a real relationship, and maybe trying to bring in more of a notion of partnership, because we need to remember that unlike the EU enlargement process, which is very much a top-down process where the EU essentially dictates what the reforms should be, what's really new about this plan is that both parties have contributed to designing it. So whether the reforms are feasible or not, is something that has also been assessed by the Western Balkan countries. Whether they have the administrative capacity to handle these reforms is something that they were also able to gauge. So they do have a responsibility, a direct responsibility, if it works or if it doesn't work. So for once, I think the blame game cannot be just on one side of the court. And both parties will need to take responsibility to see whether things work out or not.
Richard, do you believe in this power of transformation that the growth plan may have in the Western Balkans?
I think it can contribute to that. I mean, it won't do that on its own. It will support, I think, a number of things that are important and that are necessary. It creates more chance of reform, also for the reasons Isabelle said. You have the buy-in of local partners. It will bring more money into the region, and it increases the chances of much deeper market integration with the EU ahead of accession. Now, all of these three things are important. They've all been lacking so far, and I think the fact that the growth plan targets these areas is very, very important. And I think we have a greater chance than we had before the growth plan of seeing progress on all of them. If alone it's truly transformational, honestly, I doubt it. I think partly because there just isn't enough money involved for it to be a true game changer and to have this kind of carrot incentivizing reform that we've always talked about in relation to the Western Balkans and previous accession countries as well. But I think if everybody does their homework, it can be part of a better momentum towards enlargement and better economic progress and positive change in the region.
As you mentioned, Richard, there is limitation to the funding, but given the region's challenges when it comes to financial and structural limitations, how can the EU and the Western Balkan 6 countries navigate these challenges and keeping the reform going on track?
Well, I think, part of it is just purely the public funding. And there I would say, yes, there are institutional challenges, that's clear. But what we've seen with previous accession countries is that when the carrot is there, when the money is really available, countries often, that is when they will do the reform. When they see that it's possible, if we do these reforms, we get access to more funds. We've seen that in Croatia, we've seen that in Romania, and I think that's also something we can possibly see in the Western Balkans. But then the other part is what happens with the private capital. Because if we really want to see the kind of economic transformation that we've seen in countries like Poland, for example, in the Western Balkans, which I think what we all want to see, the private capital has to come in greater volume as well. Now, that is not necessarily at the heart of the growth plan, but if we see serious reform progress and we see a serious deepening of market integration within the region and of the region with the EU, that really increases the chances that the big private investors from outside will get interested.
I will go into more details into the implementation of the growth plan, but Val, I wanted to ask you about the potential, if the growth plan, as you see it, could be the first step towards rethinking how the EU structures its budget, for instance, one of that prioritizes competitiveness and excellence while integrating the Balkans more fully into the EU MMF, for instance, the multi-annual financial framework. Would that be an added tool of help?
Well, absolutely, Ilva. And that's why I mentioned from the very beginning, this is a novelty for the way that's presented to the Western Balkans, differently from the IPA funding that was more, one direction coming from the European Union to the Western Balkans for the reforms to be implemented. I believe that when you talk more broadly about the EU funding and competitiveness, it's not only related to the Western Balkans. This is a much bigger issue that deals with how the European Union will structure its MFF in the future. And I believe that 2025 will be a very important year for the EU itself, to seeing that, how the funds will be distributed, where most of the funding will go. Is it going to go into the cohesion funds, or is it going to go into pushing for more competitiveness, resembling, as I mentioned, the post-COVID funding of the European Union? But also for the Western Balkans, I think it's going to be a reality check, a big reality check, in the sense that we'll see how much funding from the European Union in the MFF will go towards the enlargement countries, the Western Balkans, but also the Eastern European countries. And that will make us understand how serious the European Union will be about the future membership of those countries in the European Union.
Isabelle, I want to go back to your point of, yeah, sure.
If I just wanted to add to this, to what just Val said, that we have seen over the past years a shift in the way that the EU is doing its development aid anyway, moving from purely assistance to loans and investments. So the Commission is essentially following the same model to use in an enlargement. And what will be very interesting to see is what will happen to the IPA funds in the new MFF? Will they still exist, or will rather the road of the growth plan become the model to be followed, or will they be merged? And then, of course, we need to also have a reality check when it comes to what is happening internally in the EU and whether the EU member states will be willing to put more money on enlargement and how they would like to organize this funding. I imagine that they will want to create an instrument that really moves more towards investment rather than having the money sit in an EU budget per se.
When will we know about this? Will they wait for some results from the growth plan as it is now before deciding on moving to next steps, Isabelle?
Well, and the discussions on the MFF will start in the summer. So already this summer, they will be discussing these issues. There will be already some first results from the growth plan, from the implementation of the growth plan. So definitely, I expect the discussion to already start this summer.
Interesting. And you did mention, Isabelle, the co-ownership of from both the EU and the Western Balkan countries of the growth plan. But what do you think about the conditionality and the rewarding progress of the reform progress for the countries? What mechanisms can be put in place to ensure accountability?
Well, there is a benchmarking process going on. Everything is organized according to projects. So I think essentially when you look at the micro level, it might not look so ambitious, but there has been a very clear benchmarking process with steps. And then it depends how ambitious individual countries have wanted to do to make these reforms. But what the Commission has tried to do is weigh the different steps from 1 to 5 and accord the money according to how ambitious each step is. And this is also how the payment will be done. So at least it's done more transparently, I think. It's more measurable. In theory, no one needs to see what it's actually going to look like in action. And this is really unclear so far.
Following up, Isabelle, I think it's a bigger question of the conditionality that, I think we can frankly say that we haven't seen it work so much in the Western Balkans in the enlargement process. So it's not just specifically to the growth plan, but it's a much bigger question of how to make conditionality work in order to push for the necessary reforms to prepare these countries to become, eligible to be EU member states.
How do we evaluate this conditionality? Like, is there any political element that gives the from 1 to 10 result on each reform, Richard? Or that's purely technical? What's your view on it?
Well, I think as Isabelle said, we have to wait and see, really. I mean, we're going slightly into uncharted waters here. But I think for me on the conditionality, the point is, the conditionality is very important. It's a central element of this. It should not be given up on. But what we've seen if we take a broader view over the last 25 years or so, we have seen these occasions across Central and Eastern Europe where reforms have really worked, where the conditionality has been put in place and the conditions have been met, and we've seen genuine reform progress. But it has always been as part of a really credible EU enlargement process. And that has not been the case in the Western Balkans for quite a long time. So I think, and I don't here want to downplay the importance of the conditionality and the benchmarking. It's very, very important. But I think in the end, these are serious reforms. If you look at what countries need to do, never mind to join the EU, but just within the growth plan to join the single market, for example, this is serious stuff. This is a lot of investment of political capital. These are difficult reforms. There's a reason that they haven't happened already. And what we know from, as I said, the last 25 years is that this only really happens when the carrot is there, where the real carrot is there, when the enlargement process is credible and the rewards are obvious at the end of it. And that's when local politicians are able to do it. And That, we have to say that hasn't really been the case in the Western Balkans for quite a long time. And that's why I say the growth plan, it fits into this and it's important. Everything in it is very important. But I think if we really want this, as you said right at the start, this transformational impact, which I think we all do, it needs to be part of credible enlargement.
And Richard, and then the other panelists, if you'd like to jump in, do you believe the growth plan, the success of the growth plan, could restore some of the wounded credibility and trust in the EU among the Western Balkan countries, Richard?
I mean, partly. I mean, I think it has all of the right elements that I would see on the way to accession. I mean, I think for me, it's right to be thinking in this way because accession takes so much longer now. I mean, we have countries waiting a couple of decades. That wasn't the case before. So the idea that there is thinking going on about how do we incentivize reforms ahead of accession, but how do we bring more of the rewards before accession as well? How do we boost economic development on the way to accession? I think this is all important. It's welcome thinking, and I think we shouldn't be too critical of that. My sense, though, as an economist looking at this, as I said, over the last couple of decades, is that the transformational impact, and I think everybody in the region realizes this as well, in the end, it's got to be full accession. To replicate what's happened, this great economic success stories that we have in Central Europe and increasingly now in places like Romania as well, no one's been able to replicate that outside the EU yet. It needs to still be that. So if this is a step on the way to that, which people believe really is a step on the way to accession and not some kind of halfway house holding strategy, then yes. But if not, if the credibility of enlargement is not felt, then I think we should also be realistic about what kind of economic transformation we can expect as well.
Yeah, Val, what do you think about the credibility restored?
I'll say that, one of the main pillars of the growth plan is focused on, increasing this convergence, economic convergence of the Western Balkans with the European Union countries. Because unfortunately, we had seen that over the last decades, the gap had not been shrinking, on the opposite, had been, enlarging, so widening. And so I believe that this is a very important element because, Ilva, it goes back to the question regarding trust. It has to be felt by people in the countries that this is pushing or this is bringing their economies and their lives and their well-being closer to those of people in the European Union. So that will be a very important element. My fear, and I try to be optimistic on the growth plan as a tool, a novelty tool that the European Union found to push the enlargement process. However, my fear will be that a lot of people might consider the growth plan as a low-hanging fruit, and once you achieve that, that's good for the region. So it's important to push for what Richard was saying, because the full transformation in the Western Balkans will happen when the countries become EU member states. But we know that to get there, especially economically and from the rule of law perspective, you need to go through these tough reforms. That cannot happen on their own and overnight. But unfortunately, for the Western Balkans, it has been a very long time of transition. So that's why we need to come up with new ideas in order to keep the process going.
I do think that the growth plan is a positive initiative. I am worried, however, that we are still falling in a logic of the good cop, bad cop, with the Commission being the good cop and maybe returning to a situation where it's rather a technical actor, because let's not forget that EU enlargement actually happens in the Council and things are so unpredictable there. So I think by introducing this new instrument, and it's not the only instrument that shows that there is an understanding first of the geopolitical moment, but also an attempt to move towards convergence, because we also saw the way that the EU reports on rule of law have changed with integrating the assessment of the Western Balkans. So, the growth plan is just another instrument, but then are the member states really going to follow up on that and, not let the the Western Balkan countries down. That remains to be seen. And it will also have to do with the many elections that will continue to happen in the member states and how these go.
I truly encourage our listeners and viewers to this podcast to read your terrific report on the EU growth plan and see all the potential that is in there and the shortbacks and the problems that may be. But before we conclude this conversation, I want to have a lightning round speed question for each of you. Val, if you have to name one main advantage, main benefit, and one main setback of the growth plan, what would it be?
The carrot incentive. It's a main advantage, but it's not enough money for the region to push for those reforms that should have taken place also as part of the overall enlargement process. So although we talk about this carrot and the money that's coming in the region, still I believe it's not enough to convince not just the leaders, but the societies of these countries to push with the tough reforms.
Richard?
Well, what I like
What's your main risk, main benefit?
Yeah, main benefit, I think, I really like how they've really put everything together. It's the whole package, it's the integration of the region with itself, integration of the region with the EU, with the single market, more EU money coming into the region, rule of law reforms. I think the whole, it has to be the whole package for the economic transformation. So I like that everything is really, there's a recognition of how everything interacts with each other. Main drawback, I think, just the EU has not committed enough funds to this. I understand the worry about institutional limitations, etc., but I would try it. I would like to see the EU have a more of a go with EU funds. It would not cost the EU much anyway, and I think that was a missed opportunity.
Isabelle?
I agree with what Richard and Val have said. I would add that I like the fact that the Commission has responded to the debates that have been happening for years within the think tank community and the European Parliament. So, this is a concrete response. We have asked for this to happen, and it is happening now. So we should celebrate this new, initiative. But, it's the politics that scare me, really, at this moment of great uncertainty for everyone.
But Ilva, on a positive note,
that's just not in the Western Balkans and the EU, I guess. That goes much larger now. Yes, Val.
Well, on a positive note, we had never seen something come out so quickly from the European Union. And we had we had all European Commission, European Council, and the European Parliament agree on this plan. So this is something that we should not forget. We should, I think, as Isabelle was saying, as a community it's pushing and is optimistic about the future of the region, maybe we should already start pushing about a growth plan too that adds more value and money and reforms to the region.
And ask the region to take ownership and even more ownership and deliver in what they want, their EU integration goal. Thank you so much. A huge thank you to you, Richard, Val, and Isabelle. The road for the growth plan ahead may be challenging, but it looks like it has a huge potential to make an impact in the Western Balkans. Thank you so much for watching Balkans Debrief. Let's keep the conversation going.